Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Monday, April 23rd, 2018 regular meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission. May I have the first item on the agenda?
Item 1A is roll call. Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner Kirkjian.
Here.
Commissioner Sahakian. Commissioner Makarian. Chairperson Yakubian.
Here. Next item, Myrna.
Item 1B is flag salute. Chairperson Yakubian.
Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item, Myrna.
Item 2 is posting of the agenda. The agenda for the Monday, April 23rd, 2018 special meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission was posted by Friday, April 20th before 5 p.m. on the bulletin board outside of City Hall. Should be regular meeting, sorry.
Next item.
Item 3 is approval of minutes for the February 26, 2018 regular meeting.
Does anyone have any?
I move approval. Second?
Next item, Myrna.
Item 4 is oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decisions. I have no speaker cards.
Next item.
Item 5 is information only. This is the presentation of the South Glendale Community Plan. The presentation will be by Laura Stotler and Eric Cross.
Chair and members of the Transportation Parking Commission staff, my name is Laura Stotler, and I will be presenting an overview of the South Glendale Community Plan. I know several of you have already heard part of this presentation. When we presented it before to the Planning Commission, we actually had a presentation on the South Glendale Community Plan as well as the EIR. This is only going to be on the community plan since the EIR public comment period has closed. So when we look at the South Glendale Community Plan, we're talking about the area that's south of the 134 freeway and including the area, a small area north of the freeway within the downtown specific plan area that's between Louise and Central up to Glen Oaks. The South Glendale Community Plan is part of our general plan. Our general plan is our document that guides our growth through 2040. The South Glendale Community Plan will look at changing and sustainable land use patterns, look at community character. We analyze this past projects in terms of what's happened in the past that sets the context for going forward. We also have a number of citywide policies and regional initiatives that we're addressing in the community plan, such as greenhouse gas reduction and sustainability. And I would add to that absolutely transportation-oriented development. So in background, we've done a number of study sessions from July to August. In 2016, we met with City Council. Council identified the project they wanted us to study as part of the EIR, as well as alternatives for the EIR. We had scoping meetings in fall 2016 for the environmental document. Public outreach occurred in fall 2016. And then we had the EIR available between January and March of this year for 60 days worth of public comments. Right now, the public comment period is closed and we're creating a final EIR and including responses to those comments. So this is actually the project that was directed by council. The areas that are shown in yellow, those are areas mostly residential where we're looking at maintaining the existing zoning, existing pattern of development. We're anticipating less than 1% growth between now and 2040. The areas that are shown in kind of an orange color, those are areas that we're looking at enhancing. We think enhancement, we're not necessarily looking at changing the zoning, but we think there's a lot of policies that we can look to make that area more accessible to transit users. And so those are policies that you'll see included in our community plan in Chapter 4. Most of those are transit-oriented development, first mile, last mile improvements. How do you get people from the neighborhoods to transit corridors? And then the areas that we're looking in pink, those were where we think we're going to have a transform. We think we will see a change in the land use in those areas. The vast majority of that area is downtown specific plan, that's pink. That's already been adopted. We're not looking at making many changes to the South Glendale Community Plan with the exception of 21 lots. Right now, those 21 lots have split zones. We would be looking at including those 21 lots within the downtown specific plan area. But where you do see changes would be along the corridors. We're looking at potentially having mixed-use zones being put in along Colorado, along Broadway, and then we already have mixed-use zones along in the SFMU along San Fernando Road, but we're also looking at extending some of the mixed use down into Central. And then the largest change we're looking at would be transit-oriented development in a TOD area. This would be taking advantage of the transportation opportunities around our Metrolink station. I would also point out that as part of transit, we're looking at, in the study that was directed by council, it includes the streetcar that would connect our train station on up through Brand or Central, on out Glen Oaks to the airport. We're also looking at Space 134. This would be a freeway cap. It may also include, if there's a bus rapid transit extension or a light rail extension to points east and west, hopefully to connect to the Gold Line. Then we would also be looking at a bus rapid transit that would run either down Broadway or perhaps Colorado, and then on up Central, and then on out Glen Oaks. Again, these are Metro projects. We're trying to have a document that would address whichever route Metro might want to look at. And then we're also looking at Metrolink. There's expansion of service that's proposed. Not only are they looking at having high-speed rail in the area, but there may be an expansion to include not only express service, but perhaps local routes as well. And to accommodate that, we've looked at adding several stops, and you'll see those with M. These would be expansion of transit stops. So we have our existing station, but we may be looking at one up on Colorado, maybe one out in Pelinconi, and then stops that would serve along the 134 freeway. So the purpose of a South Glendale community plan is to really look at a neighborhood focus for our land use policies. Right now, we have our land use element that was originally adopted in 1977. We had an update for multifamily residential areas that occurred in 1986. But essentially the policies that we're operating with today were set in place in 1977. So we want to look at those. How do we take those citywide policies and address them on a neighborhood level in South Glendale? And I should mention that the South Glendale Community Plan is one of several community plans that we're looking at. We started with the North Glendale Community Plan that was adopted several years ago. Should the South Glendale Community Plan be adopted, then we'll proceed with an East and West Plan. So if you take a look at the community plan, you'll see Chapter 5. A lot of time was spent on past planning efforts. That's because we've realized a lot of planning has gone into South Glendale. It just hasn't been coordinated. And so our goal with this plan is to take those past planning efforts and put them all in one document, recognizing the work that has been done in the past really does set our stage for the future growth. And then we also have a Metro grant for a Tropico study that was done. Tropico study is included as an appendix to the community plan. And then we also have transit-oriented development policies that are included. I should mention that this whole project, the community plan, the Tropico study, and the community plan EIR are all being paid for by Metro in an effort to encourage Glendale to adopt transit-oriented development policy. We also have incorporated policies of Safe and Healthy Streets Plan, as well as a draft pedestrian plan. In other related actions, to adopt the South Glendale Community Plan, not only would we have a community plan adopted, we would have land use and circulation element amendments adopted. These would be minor amendments that would just make our documents consistent. At the time we did our original land use element again that really started back in 1977, we weren't looking at having community plans. So we want to make sure that we're updating it in language and in our land use designations to accommodate this community plan. And then we'd also be looking at some minor amendments to the circulation element. Again, our document was their circulation element was, I believe, 1998. So it just needs to be updated. We have a tremendous amount of growth and changes to our network. We want to make sure that we update our documents to reflect that. We also have regional and local transportation networks that we need to address through our documents. We want to make sure our project is consistent with the RTP SCS from SCAG. We also have affordable housing overlay that we're looking at. That's one of the options that's come out of. If we do put in expanded transit, then there would be an opportunity for us along one block either way of the transit lines that could go in on Central or on East Broadway or on Colorado to up the zoning, increase the residential zoning. Right now, our highest residential zone is R1250. In the past, we've actually downzoned it. We have areas that were developed at our 750s. So what we would be looking at is on one side or the other of the streets, if we expand that, our transit. So that would be looking at Central, Colorado, and Broadway. We would look at increasing those densities to R1250. So in some cases, it would be matching the density that we've built at before prior to 1986. And in other cases, it's not quite the density where it was R750 it's still higher than what we're proposing, but we'd be looking at going back to really a density that would encourage transit-oriented development. And then the other issues that we're looking at, I mentioned the DSP zone changes. And then we also have 6 lots that were added to this project. These are lots that were zoned C3-3. C3 is the uses, regional community uses, but the second 3 is height. That's 90 feet. And they said, no, 90 feet's too tall. It doesn't really fit in. Where those lots are located are essentially on Wilson, between Isabel, just right next to essentially where City Hall is. Right now it's developed with a building that used to be a credit union. It's a 3-story office building and actually a residential unit. So the residential unit, we're proposing to change the zoning to R1250. That would match what it's built at today. And then for the C3 zoning, we'd be looking at reducing the height district. So instead of being C3-3, it would be C3-1, which would allow maximum of 50 feet. Again, that would basically have a zoning match the development that's already there. This was a project that we looked at in the South Glendale Community Plan, EIR, and this includes those different land uses I was talking about. So you'll see the purple, these are basically mixed-use zones. We're proposing to put them along our corridors. So you'd have Colorado, you'd have Broadway, you would have Central. And we're also looking at a purple. This would be our transit-oriented development area that we'd be looking for around our train station. And then we would also recognize that we have our DSP. This is our highest density, our urban core for the city. We're not making a change to the DSP that was already adopted. But if you could think of this as building out the rest of, or at least planning for the rest of the growth that we started with the downtown specific plan. So when we talk about Tropico, this was really the reason that started a lot of this project, because we received a grant for Tropico. Includes the area where the star is. This is our transit station. We also have major employers there. Here's Glendale Memorial. We have a number of transit lines that currently run through that area. We'd be looking at expanding them, and therefore this is an area that would be ripe for transit-oriented development and increased densities here. So that is part of our study. The community plan looks at a number of ways to get people out and walking, making most of our transit system, and not just transit in terms of buses, but also we have pedestrian connections and bicycle connections. So while our main policies are to maintain neighborhood character, we also are looking at ways that we can improve walkable streets. And we want to make sure that when streets look better, it's good for economic development. We also want to have open space and park connections so people can walk to those locations. We're always concerned with pedestrian safety. So you'll see a lot of recommendations for pedestrian safety. If you take a look at Chapter 4, the type of public improvements we're looking. Then I also mentioned the infill. And again, these plans grow on each other. So as we were looking for the different options in the EIR, you can think of these are all inclusive. We would also have bike lanes and bike hubs, look at expanding transit service, having transit adjacent housing, not just in the TOD, but again along those corridors. and then streetscape enhancements. We're looking at integrating open space, public and private, multimodal streets, multiple activity centers throughout the city, multiple transit centers. Right now, the one we have is the transit center down at the Metrolink, but we may be looking at others. And as well as we're looking at transformed opportunity sites. We know we have a handful of locations throughout the city that the zoning allows for more development than what's there now. We figure those areas are likely to cycle the next time we have a building boom. So we want to accommodate that. And then Space 134, this is really a separate project, but it's within our community plan area, so we wanted to address that. Right now it's still under study, but we'd be looking at doing walking trails, event space, transit amenities, perhaps a place for cafes or food trucks or farmers market, community-oriented type activities. So our next steps is we have our final EIR. We're anticipating that will be out by the end of the month. We have our Planning Commission also by the end of May, where we're looking for their recommendations. So any comments you give us today, we would be providing to the Planning Commission for their consideration. Once Planning Commission makes a recommendation, we would be taking that along with the final EIR to the City Council. We're hoping to have that to them sometime in June and no later than mid-July. And so anybody who's interested in taking a look at the South Glendale Community Plan, I know we distributed copies to you earlier, but they're available for the public as well to watch or to look at. You can find them on the city's website. And that concludes my presentation. We do have a number of members of staff and our consultant here who could answer questions.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you very much. We've had the opportunity, a couple of us have had the opportunity to really sit through this and at previous meetings be able to really get our hands into it. Do you have any questions? Let me start with.
Go ahead, Armand, this is the first time. Go ahead.
Thank you. I read through the documents that were provided to us, and I might have missed this, and I don't see it on any of the visuals presented today. In the issue of redevelopment, and especially as it relates to parking, and again, I might have missed it, but I didn't see any reference to the concept of park once, where zoning requirements, parking required by zoning at certain properties are, I won't use the term relaxed, but it'd be planned so that parking structures are built where people walk 3, 4, 5 blocks instead of every particular private property having to make the required, what I would call somewhat antiquated zoning for cars. And I'm wondering if any of that has been brought to the table in our city. There are communities in the country and some nearby where a single parking structure 3 to 4 or 5 blocks away is very successful in doing a lot of the bullets that you showed up there, especially energizing streets, safety, and people who come to a community or to a neighborhood park once, and they can do 4, 5, or 6 things by walking about 4 or 5 blocks potentially.
Yeah, no, I've included that in the policies in the community plan.
It has not been included.
But to my knowledge, we've not included that.
Are you familiar with the concept?
Yes, I've heard of the Park Once concept, but we've not received direction to include that in the plan, and it's not in our Tropico study, other than we know we have an issue down by the hospital, and so we have been looking at some of the parking incentives that we used for the MS zone, the medical services zone that the city has, where we do allow, where you have a major employer like a hospital, that you can relax parking standards or in some of the medical office buildings around it, or businesses that support or are in tandem with the hospital. So, I mean, that is one of the things we're looking for. It's not called Park Once, but in terms of standards that we'd be looking for a TOD development, we are looking at doing some of, I would call it parking incentives as part of the TOD area, but that's because our major employer is the hospital, and so we'd be looking at parking incentives associated with the hospital in particular.
So has our planning staff looked at the possibility or presented to the Planning Commission the notion of park once?
Yeah, we haven't even thought of it, that I'm aware of. Unless transportation wants to add, I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
So, but we can certainly raise that issue to the Planning Commission.
Well, I just think in the interest of, I think where people are going or where society is going relative to cars, and also where other places it's been quite successful, it's actually turned around economically areas that were significantly not bringing in the money that should be brought in economic development, where the city takes the initiative potentially with a nonprofit developer, but normally done by the city through redevelopment, which I know we don't have anymore, but there are ways through maybe P3 to public-private partnerships to put up a structure or two in significant locations, and then the private development or nonprofit development doesn't have to meet all of the required and somewhat archaic requirements for parking today, especially with the movement of less cars are going to be on our streets, as people are saying, into the future. And it would seem appropriate to take a look at Park once in our city, given the density of the city and the areas that we're attempting to promote public transportation.
Okay.
I don't know if other commissioners feel the same, but I wouldn't want to make this just a one-person effort here. I just think that if this is an item that requires discussion, I say apparently there's no action, so we can't make a motion on it apparently. Is that correct? It seems kind of strange not to be able to do that, but okay, I appreciate that. So it's a bit concerning that that doesn't exist, especially when we want to encourage walkable streets, and that strategy seems to have been omitted, either intentionally or unintentionally. And for a city that has different nodes throughout our city, it would seem like it would be appropriate to put together a strategy so people can park and then walk 4 or 5 places to get to, and then have a vibrant neighborhood and a vibrant community. And also it also is good for health. It's one of the bullets I noticed was safe and healthy streets, so people get out of their car and walk 4 or 5 blocks sometimes in a real TOD area.
Commissioner, and I just want to bring up one point that, under the Park Ones, we have a policy in the plan that are talking about the Park Ones, is talking about the policy 6.1.6 under the Transportation Management District. So we include the Park Ones, under that policy.
So is it possible to, in summary that has been made in these presentations, that that's included? Because there are some very, how would you say, appropriately cutting-edge developers that see the merit in Park Ones, because you put the money into the building where the people are and not the money into the bricks and mortar for cars.
Absolutely.
And if it's at all possible and other commissioners concur, I think the Park Ones concept should really be looked at at a higher, more sophisticated level, and see where it's working in other cities.
Sure.
So it's noted in...
Is noted in the plan. Under the 6.16.
6.1.6?
6.1.6.
26?
B. Yeah.
Thank you. 6.1.
6.1.6.
Okay, 6.1.6. And what page is that, please?
Is page 4-15-21. That's the...
And is it just a brief statement? Can you read it, please?
Yeah, actually, it's a long one.
Okay, that's all right. I'll look it up. I'll look it up. I'm fine. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, isn't what you're suggesting, Commissioner Gonzalez, very similar to what we have across from the public library, the parking lot where people park and go to public library, go to Adults Community Center, and go to Americana and Galleria and all the amenities downtown and go back? That's pretty much what your suggestion is.
That's a suggestion. That's definitely suggesting. However, that's only one level, of parking, and it's generally always full. I know when I go by there to park, but I'm thinking of strategic parking structures where you go maybe down 1 floor and maybe 3 up above, and those are parking structures that are then serve all of the people and the requirements for parking in that area. You still have to do parking on their private properties, but the parking is not as I'm going to use the word archaic as it's been over the years, where the parking dictates the use of the building more than it does for the people of the building.
In other words, public parking will be used for private developers, like we did on Lemley Theaters. Part of Lemley Theaters is being parked at the Exchange, isn't it?
Yeah, it's possible to do it that way. The ones that I've seen have been developed by cities, and then they're gold mines after that.
Yeah.
They bring in some good money for improvements in the city.
Okay. Interesting. Laura, let me ask you, what do you mean by transit-oriented developments down in Tropico? Is that apartments you're referring to, or?
Yeah, we're looking at mixed use with higher density residential. So you actually have people who are living and walking in the neighborhood and have access to the bus network, the Metrolink. If we put in a streetcar, the streetcar.
For example, will R&D type use with living element, will that qualify for such thing? As if a developer has office use, R&D type use for the first couple of stories and then residential units above it, will that qualify for something like that?
Yeah, we're looking at it's mixed use.
It's still mixed use.
So yeah, it would have it would depend on the project. When we talk about transit-oriented development, we're looking at densities of 35 dwelling units per acre or higher, because that's what's been established by the state as being a transit density and affordable density. So that's basically what we're looking at, as a higher density mixed use, or it could be all residential in terms of, you can have mixed use area where you might have residential next to a commercial. It doesn't all have to be a mixed use building. It doesn't all have to be in one building. But that whole area, we're looking at changing the zoning. I should point out that a lot of the Tropico area is already zoned San Fernando. It's San Fernando mixed use zone, and that already allows for mixed use. So basically, we have zoning in place, but what we don't have are policies of how do you get that zoning, how do you get the connection?
How do you assemble them, you mean?
I mean, now we're just looking in a silo. We look at individual lots as they come in. We don't have a tool to really look at what kind of policies do we have to get good connections. So you hear a lot of discussions like, how do we connect to our open space? How do we get connections to the neighborhood? How do we get people out and walking? How do we get standards that encourage people to walk? Well, a lot of those, that's policy, and that's the policy level that's missing in our current general plan. And so, I can't stress enough, really take a look at Chapter 4 in the community plan, because that spells out, based on different types of land use that we're anticipating, how do you make a neighborhood walkable? Where do you put street trees? Where do you put street furniture? Where do you put your crossings? How do you make things safer? We don't really, right now, that doesn't exist in our general plan documents. We do have it in other efforts that we've looked at. And that's part of the reason why we've spent a lot of time. What are the past policy documents that we've looked in at the city? We have a Safe and Healthy Streets plan. We're doing a PED plan. We have bicycle plans. It's never been, we haven't holistically incorporated that into a planning document. And so really that's what we're looking at doing. At the same time, a lot of people are concerned about growth and development. But even if you took anything that we're looking at expanding the units and just take land use the way it is, gets a band started. But if you just take the growth the way it is right now and don't make any changes to the existing zoning and general plan, there's still a tremendous value into getting those policies adopted. The policies I think of as connectivity. How do we get people to connect? How do we make our open space more usable? If you have public and private, what's that interface like? How do we really maximize the use in the city? And right now it's piecemeal. Some projects are looked at more carefully than others. Some developers think about that, others don't. So we'd like to have the community plan at least as a tool for thinking about policy on a bigger level, not just lot by lot, but what do we want to see for a neighborhood? And it's the neighborhoods in the community plan, the different communities in the community plan that give value to this document. And I don't know if that answered your question, but that's when we talk about transit-oriented development. It's not just the density of the building, but it's a whole environment. How do you make it more attractive for people to get out and walk and take transit.
I understand. My point is, a lot of entertainment-related businesses across the railroad tracks in LA are basically being torn down for apartment buildings. In Los Angeles, really pushing apartments. A lot of those businesses, entertainment-related businesses, which primarily their office use, will be relocated. Warner Music is opening rented just a huge space in LA, which is basically south of Chinatown. And they're moving over there. And if there's opportunity for smaller users that are in the entertainment business, that'll be an ideal place for them work and to be residential above it. And if we can, and there'll be very good amenities for Glendale for live, work, and walk, everything in one place. And next to Tropico train station in the whole area. So those are some of the things that we should be zoned for us to be able to attract those kind of users. And if, I don't know if it's going to come to fruition or not, where Levitt's used to be, that part of Atwater, between Doran and Brazil Street, if they're talking, making it Lake Los Angeles, if that thing ever happens, all those people have to be moved. A lot of industries there that are entertainment related. Some of them are industrial, but a lot of them are office uses. If we can capitalize on moving those folks to Tropico for live work, this is the opportunity, I would say. We should be able to allow them and not be strictly residential, if you will.
Mixed use is exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah,
it's mixed
yeah.
use. It's not necessarily
so-
all residential. Like I said, there's horizontal mixed use as well as vertical mixed use.
Yeah, okay, that's, yeah. I mean, what I meant by mixed use is like targeting retail first floors. That's what I meant by, that's what I'm saying. If it can be 2 stories of mixed use and then residential above it,
Well, the zoning that we're proposing would allow that to occur.
well, okay, that's my
And the
question.
zoning that's there now allows that to occur.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, and also, multi-mobile street. Can you define that to the viewing public, what that means?
Yeah, we're looking at a street that'll accommodate a variety of users. So it's not just auto-oriented. It'll include autos as well as pedestrians. It'll include bicyclists. It'll include transit. In certain instances, we may be looking at streets that include streetcars.
Streetcars.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have any additional that you'd like to add. But that's kind of what when we talk about multimodal, that's what we're looking for.
Thank you.
Yes, please. The response that you gave to a question, thank you. It prompted me to remember that. Has there been any effort, and you said that on what's being proposed, what we are proposing, I'm assuming you're saying about staff for the city. Has there been any study or interest in giving a proposal in this plan that has to do with Park Once? Other than, I still have to read the document just to see it and see what it says, but has there been any direction or thinking by our planning staff relative to the potential initiation of Park One concept? If it says it in there, then I'm fine.
I mean, I think you've heard from Fred that it's been addressed in the EIR.
But in being addressed, does that mean it's not included for a potential environmental impact? Or is it, that's what I'm asking, please.
Yes, I'm Eric Krause. I'm the Deputy Director of Community Development. Members of the Commission, Commissioner Gonzalez. So the concept of Park Once is not actually identified in the plan itself as a specific item, but that's certainly some. The comments we're hearing from you guys today, we'll go ahead and make sure that the Planning Commission is aware of the comments you guys have made, as well as City Council. If they choose that that's something they want us to focus on, then we can do it at that time. Right now, we haven't looked at that concept currently.
Does the planning staff see any merits or demerits of the Park One concept?
Well, I think there's definitely some merit to it, and there's I know our economic development group is looking at the potential for building another parking structure in the downtown. The biggest issue is availability of land and resources, of course, in order to build that, but that's one concept that's being floated around economic development right now, to build a new structure somewhere to downtown, where we just don't know at this point.
It just seems that the objectives that Laura says we're wanting to meet, Park Once would have a big effort in doing that, because then you would have potential property owners that would not have to, they still have to meet their parking requirements, but they pay for the money through the parking structure, and it's by zoning credits. So the money comes in to help pay for the building of the structure, and you don't have to have all of your parking on the site like we have been doing traditionally. And then this is a site, you put parking. This is a site, you put parking. But I'm hearing about safe streets, people walking, going to places. If the parking structure is here, then they can go to all these places, not have to get in the car and go 3 more blocks to another place. Or
Yeah,
it's
and
a
as
very
you
good.
mentioned, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
I'm
off.
sorry. It's a very good urban planning concept.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, there are specific uses in the downtown that are leasing spaces or allocate some spaces in some of our structures. Lemley being one of them, they do have some allocation for spaces within that building.
The new one.
Correct, yeah.
So given that, why would we not be saying that there's some, you're implying to me that there's some merit to that. And if there is, why would we not be putting that in?
Well, I think that the policy we have in there is probably directed towards something similar. It doesn't necessarily say park once.
Okay.
But that's something we can definitely mention as terms of what's some of the comments that we did here.
Well, there's only one commissioner speaking on the others. I mean, the questions
Well, I
that
know,
were
but
asked.
that doesn't mean we're not going to tell them that we heard that from the commission.
Well, other commissioner, it would be that there would be some concurrence, because it just seems like it's a very important urban planning concept that's working in a lot of other places. It has challenges, and without redevelopment, it makes it a bit more difficult. But P3 permits it. I mean, there's a way you can get it through public-private partnerships today. And there are people wanting to put money in it because they see the merit of the need for parking, but not parking on every particular lot.
Yeah, and so we do have mechanisms in our code to charge an in lieu fee, but we do have other mechanisms that don't require you to do the in lieu fee. You can just get a parking exception, which is a much easier, cheaper route. So that's one of the concepts we're looking at in terms of making modifications to our parking chapter in general, not related to the South Glendale Community Plan, but just in a way to try to maybe get some funding in order to build a structure at some point. Because right now they have options, and one of them is an in lieu fee, but if I don't have to pay the in lieu fee, why would I do that? So.
The South Glendale Community Plan goes from the east-west freeway down all the way to our city limits, right?
Everything south of the 134.
Yeah, so that's prime areas for Park Once.
Yeah, so we will definitely raise that comment to the Planning Commission and City Council as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So I'll make a few comments. First of all, Commissioner Gonzalez, today, because of the informational only designation for this presentation today, as I understand it, all of our comments will be so duly given to the Planning Commission. So although I agree with you, I'm going to go and ask a few more questions. When you were discussing, Laura, about not just increasing the transportation lines, but increasing, yes, and also making changes in the South Glendale area. Has the B-line, and since B-line is under our purview under this commission, has that been, will there be a study to address or analyze the effect of changes such as the possibility of a streetcar, increased metro lines, how that will affect the B-line, and what is the future of the B-line in this plan?
That's a B-line question, so I'm going to have to refer it to transportation. Okay. I don't know the answer.
Okay. Sorry, Fred. I got you out of yours.
That's okay. Madam Chairman, okay, I'm Fred Zorvan. I apologize, I didn't say my name last time. B-line, we are looking at a line by line, analysis, and we're going to do that in future. But any study we do for the, any transportation study we do, we look at the B-line and coordination of B-line with the other mode of transportation. But a streetcar, for example, is one project that we're doing. We're looking at how that's going to work with the B-line and how B-line is going to, enhance that mode of transportation. In addition to that, we are doing a lot of first mile, last mile
Wow.
project that make it convenient for people to take the Beeline and also other buses that the city has.
Right. Let me ask you, just maybe you can educate me. So this is driven by Metro, this project, let's say, like focus on the Tropico area,
It was funded
funded by Metro.
Yes.
So are we beholden, in order to receive this money, are we necessarily needing to put their ideas of how Metro should, whether increasing Metro lines, decreasing B lines, are we putting their interests then, let's say, before the B line?
The
for example?
TOD was the whole concept is that we do some development around the transit road in the city, that whatever the transit user are,
Oh, okay.
we do that.
So it doesn't have to be the Metro bus, or it
No,
can be
no,
a
any
it can be a
transit,
city
yeah,
B-line bus. Okay, that was just something I wanted to that we don't forget the B-line, but of course you guys won't. I know you do a very
absolutely.
extensive analysis, and isn't it time for another big analysis on the B-line? If I'm not mistaken, it's I think it's almost time. But let me ask Laura, because you had mentioned about the EIR and how you're taking comments that were presented within that receiving period, and you're going to address it in the final EIR. So can you explain to people who are watching comments that were given, such as the grave concern of lack of police response? So when you say you're addressing an issue, are you finding a solution for that issue? Are you not addressing it but focusing on other things? How do you address things that in the EIR were already designated as, and I forget the terminology, substantially
Yeah, if we have a
impacted?
significant environmental impact.
Impact, correct, yeah.
Right. I mean, that's how we address it. I mean, if a comment comes in, we say where they can find the information. If they said, okay, you haven't addressed this, we tell them where you can find it in the environmental document. But addressing doesn't mean solution.
Okay.
Addressing means that we've identified this as an issue.
I see.
We recognize it as an issue, and we say where we've analyzed it. Or if we haven't analyzed it, then we add an explanation or say why, where people can find information. A lot of issues that have been raised, perhaps if something's perhaps speculative, we can't answer it if it's speculative. But if it's something where we have an existing study, we can point people to where that information exists. So I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, it really gets to a specific question, and I can't answer that because right now we have our consultants looking at the comments that were raised and answering them. So I don't know exactly what answers would be or not
So
be.
from how I'm understanding it, when you craft the final EIR, you're primarily focusing on issues that haven't been addressed in the EIR? Or what do you do, and tag a little point onto that, what do you do with those comments that are, so heavy of concern on particular points of analysis in the EIR, where it's here, it's written, it says it's like this? What do you do with that, or it is what it is?
An EIR is, well, I guess it comes down to what the purpose of an environmental impact report is. The purpose of an environmental impact report is to disclose. It discloses where impacts can occur. If there's mitigation measures that'll reduce those level of impacts, it identifies what those mitigation measures are. But for certain items, as was very clear in the EIR, we have unmitigable impacts. They cannot be brought down to a level that's less than significant. And so the EIR clearly states that that's so. So I don't otherwise know how to answer it. An EIR in and of itself, the purpose of an EIR isn't to solve all the problems. It's to identify what the problems are, where there's mitigation measures that identifies those and can apply them to the project, and where mitigation is infeasible, identifies what that is. And I don't know if Eric wants to add anything else to it, but that's what the purpose of an EIR is. And right now, we don't have a final EIR. It's not out yet. I can't tell you what the answers would be, or if you have a particular issue. But I can tell you we're anticipating that we'll have the responses by the end of May.
Okay. And one last question I have, I keep asking, Fred, I may have asked you this in the past. I'll re-ask it because I am concerned. So what you have, what was described in the presentation is kind of like a bunch of tools in this toolbox, you know, including the pedestrian plan, safe and healthy streets, and all of these things. So in the scenario where this plan, let's just say hypothetically, is not adopted by City Council, what then becomes of the so valuable citywide pedestrian plan?
That concern, the EIR, I assume that Eric can answer that better than me, but I assume that we have to do the EIR for the pedestrian plan, but Eric can explain that better than.
Yes, members of the commission, Commissioner Jacobian. So in terms of the pedestrian safety plan, because of the timing on the environmental impact report for the South Glendale Community Plan and the pedestrian plan, they're treated as related projects in the environmental analysis. So the modifications in the pedestrian plan south of the 134 have all been included in the EIR for the South Glendale plan. To answer your question in terms of if the plan does not move forward and the City Council does not certify the EIR, then we'd have to do a separate environmental analysis for the PED plan. But when we do, assuming the City Council certifies the EIR, we still need to look at the improvements on the northern part of the city for the PED plan. So we can then tier off the EIR if they certify that to complete the environmental analysis for the PED plan.
So certification of the EIR and approval of the plan are separate issues?
Correct, yeah. So they need to first certify an EIR before you make any approvals on the plans.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess that's a very good way of not having to spend money if you don't necessarily have to, right?
Yes.
Very good, okay.
So they could technically certify the EIR, not adopt the plan, and then that EIR can then be used for completing the analysis on the pedestrian plan if they chose to.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I appreciate that explanation. Okay, do we have any other comments? Okay, I think we're done with that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Okay. Myrna?
Item 6 is action item. This is for the Arroyo Verdugo Communities Joint Powers Authority Measure M Future Public Participation Plan. This is the consideration of method for solicitation of public input for the Arroyo Verdugo Communities Joint Powers Authority Measure M Future Public Participation Plan.
Madam Chair Jacobian and Commissioners, as you probably familiar with this staff report, the staff is bringing it back before you, as you know, during the special meeting that was held back in January 24th. The staff presented the report before you and went into the discussion and they explained the purpose and the need for that. However, at the end of that presentation, the staff received a motion which was called by Mr. Gonzalez, I believe, and seconded by Commissioner Kirkijian. However, the staff, an apology for the commissioner, did not ask for the votes. So we're here before you requesting your vote. If you like, the staff can give you a quick presentation or kind of to remind you what that staff report is all about, and we can just ask you for a vote if you don't mind.
I think that we're okay. It was very recent, so it's still fresh in our memory. So if we
Okay.
just want to do the procedural vote.
Sure, thank you.
So we're just going to take a roll call and then you can vote. Commissioner Gonzalez,
Yes.
Commissioner Kirkjian,
Yes?
Commissioner Sahakian, Commissioner Markarian, Chairperson Yakubian.
Yes.
Thank you.
Item 6B is revision to City of Glendale Neighborhood Traffic Calming Program. This is the consideration of City of Glendale Neighborhood Traffic Calming Program.
Thank you. This is also, Madam Chair Jacobian and Commissioners, the purpose for the same reason that explained on the previous staff report. The staff is requesting your vote. The staff did receive the motion, but however, forgot to ask for your vote. So if you like, we can give also either brief presentation, or if you like, just receive the vote from
No,
you.
we're good. We're good.
Okay,
Let's
thank
go
you.
for that.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Gonzalez,
Yes?
Commissioner Kirkjian,
Yes?
Commissioner Sahakian, Commissioner Markarian, Chairperson Yakubian.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. Next item, Myrna.
Item 7 is commission staff comments and updates.
Mr. Hedy?
Yes, Madam Commissioner Yacobian and Commissioners, the staff, we have an update on some items that brought up to our attention at the last regular meeting, mainly related to traffic. And we have the traffic engineer, Mr. Lay, who can give you some update on the items such as the Caltran extending the guardrail that you mentioned during that meeting on Highway 2 southbound on-ramps by Mountain, as well as the commercial vehicle that park on the street for advertising purpose. And we have the Ms. Mia, our assistant attorney, can give you some briefing or update on that, as well as some other item pertaining to the traffic signal design also on Highway 2 and Mountain. And if you like, Mr. Tay can give you some update on those items.
That'd be good.
Chair Yacobi and members of the commission, Larry Tay, and Principal Traffic Engineer, I just wanted to take the time to briefly answer some of the questions and provide you with some updates related to matters that the commission had brought to staff's attention during our February meeting. First, there was a question over the length of guardrail on the southbound State Route 2 on-ramp from Mountain Street. We have reached out to Caltrans to inquire about evaluating the need for additional guardrail, and we are awaiting the response. And while we wait, it's important to keep in mind some of the things that highway agencies, including Caltrans, typically look for in making those determinations. Guardrail can be seen as one of two things. It can be seen as a barrier. It can also be seen as a potential object that can be struck. And the question that Caltrans will ask is, what is less severe, basically? Allowing a vehicle to strike a guardrail or to go over an embankment. And that's typically a function of the height of the embankment as well as the cross slope. So my suspicion is that those criteria change as you're going downhill, both the height and the cross slope, which is why the guardrail exists along certain segments of the ramp and not others. But we will await Caltrans' response.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
I understand that reasoning and that thinking. The only reason that I feel that this isn't needs to be kind of put on Caltrans' radar is because the lanes have changed. So instead of having 2 lanes going straight with no need, in the past, there was no need for one person in the right lane to suddenly move over to the left lane because everyone has the same lane going forward. Now we've created a designation so people in the left lane go faster or can move more quickly through the traffic while people in the right lane have that stoplight, which invites a problem because people who are stuck in the traffic stoplight may inadvertently not see it coming but turn into that lane, which will then give no other option for that vehicle than to go down an embankment. So I think that's the clincher in terms of what's changed since when they originally put that little bit of guardrail to now. There is now an inviting danger with those cars as they're trying to maneuver to go quicker.
Understood. And in our discussion with Caltrans, we will make sure we bring up these changes, that these changes in configuration are serving as the impetus for our inquiry.
Right. Very good. Thanks, Larry. Yep.
If I may, please. It's not just a matter of the driver or one of the cars from there going down, but when they do go down, there are other cars driving south on the freeway that could potentially, if I'm not,
Collision.
I mean, they could collide.
A disaster of sorts. I mean,
It's not just a person driving the car that elects to, for some reason, has been mentioned by our chair, one of those cars that goes over that area, they're going to be potentially
On the freeway.
on the freeway down below. So it affects other drivers too.
Understood. And I think the Caltrans will take these sorts of parameters into consideration in the response, both the cross slope, the height, the shoulder, the lateral clearance to the main line travel lanes. These are all things that they'll...
in the driving pattern. I mean, if you can reiterate that to them as they're doing it, it's really the driving pattern of the vehicles, especially some of our residents who try to find the quickest path from A to B. You know, I've seen it happen. So I've seen potential problems about to happen. So if you can just express that to them.
Sure, we will definitely reiterate those potentials for conflict.
May I please? When you mentioned the driving patterns and then having to wait for a decision from Caltrans, I don't know if any decision had ever been made by them regarding the frustration that happens with people waiting to make a right-hand turn from 7 to 9, and there's no one coming from the other way, from the west. And if that's what we're still waiting for, we probably won't get a feedback on this other matter for another 3 years.
I think that's one of the other issues, correct?
Right. Commissioner Gonzalez beat me to the punch, but that was next on my list.
I'm
so
sorry.
That's coming up.
if it
You have
pleases
a
the commission, I can address that now.
Do you have a response from them?
No, I don't have a response. I believe the guardrail issue is a little bit more straightforward, so we may not have to wait as long for a definitive response. In terms of the potential traffic signal timing, staff actually combed through the signal timing chart from Caltrans, and I think we've identified what we believe is the offending parameter that's in their signal timing design. So now we're going to reach out with them directly. Rather than ask them to look at it as an open-ended question, we can target a specific timing parameter and ask if the state is willing to make the proposed revision that'll combat that exactly your concern, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Can you put a request for a time frame on that? I mean, I know it's a big state.
Oh, Caltrans.
Right.
They are
Right.
our project partners in many regards. They're also
Like this fiscal year, or next fiscal year or something? It's been since 2014.
we will
Okay.
do our best to
All right.
aggressively
We'll
follow up and report
So
back.
now we're asking him for a second.
Yeah, they're on it. They take a while, I think.
Thank you for giving us an update.
Sure. There was also a question regarding a potential ramp widening project at State Route 2 and Mountain. It is programmed for Measure R funding, so staff will be working with Caltrans to initialize the project sometime in the next fiscal year.
I would say so. It takes some staff timing and a lot of process paperwork in terms of starting with the authorization for design and move up to the plan spec and construction. So within fiscal year, we'll be able to allocate the funds, secure the fund, get authorization to start with the design. And that's for the widening 3 ramps, 1 off ramps, northbound, and the 2 south on ramp and offbound and
Yeah,
off-ramp.
I don't know which commissioner may have brought that issue up. I know that route like the palm of my hand, on the lines on my hand.
Ditto.
And I don't necessarily understand what's happening in that, that on-ramp is, as you've experienced, once you flow through, it's a disaster on that freeway. It's right where the 134 is going. You have cars in the second lane traveling at 70 miles an hour. The lane next to it is at a dead stop. You have vehicles that are confused, that are trying to inch over and will basically block both lanes to get in. So I don't know what if adding another lane to that on-ramp helps anybody who's trying to get on that freeway, because once you get on that freeway, you're basically in trouble. I mean, if they could do anything, I wish they would widen or make an improvement to that 134 transition. That is a very, very bad transition, yeah.
Right, and unfortunately, the 134 transition is outside of our
No,
authority.
I know.
In terms of the potential ramp improvement project, looking at the combination of on and off ramps, it's not just about the geometric changes, it's also about operational changes. So as part of the overall improvements, Caltrans will study traffic operations along the vicinity.
Oh.
And not just make improvements to the ramp itself, but also to some of the termini and some of the connections to make sure that the entire project within that influence area is brought up to standards.
Okay. That sounds like a good plan, Larry.
And I have one more thing, if I may. Commissioner Sahakian brought up the taper transition for eastbound Mountain Street approaching Verdugo Road. It was part of a recent reconfiguration that the city implemented, and the commissioner asked if we could take a closer look at lengthening that transition, and we did a field visit, and what we found was that there could be potential benefits by lengthening that taper transition, but the taper transition can be lengthened one of two ways. You can either start it further upstream. In this particular case, it would have parking impacts over the bridge, or you can extend it and terminate the taper transition further downstream, in which case it shortens the very turn pockets that we just went through great lengths to add. So we're currently looking at a design that will strike a nice compromise and a good balance, minimizing the parking impacts and also impacts to the storage capacity of the left turn lanes. So staff is working on a redesign, and when that's completed, we'll issue a work order to our maintenance services department to reconfigure that transition at the commissioner's suggestion.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairperson Yakubian, members of the commission, just briefly, I'm sorry I don't have much more of an update for you regarding the commercial vehicles that are parked on our streets. Our police department is looking into it along with our general counsel for police. And so I'm hoping to have an update more for you once that's been done.
Okay.
Okay. Any comments?
Except for the confirmation of our next meeting, please. I think I have it, but just want to make sure. Month of.
We're looking at June 25th, but I understand that there might have been some schedule conflict with that.
I think I'm okay.
Okay.
You're looking at me, Myrna.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's okay for me, yeah. We're
Okay.
okay with the 25th.
So if nothing happens, we'll
I-
schedule for June 25th.
I may have a conflict on that date. I'll be out of the country, I think, on that date. And especially if don't have like in our last meetings, if we're short commissioner, I don't want us to miss a meeting
So we
for lack
can
of quorum.
schedule
Yeah,
a
well-
special meeting
Yeah.
in the month of June,
I mean, yeah, if
if
we do,
that date doesn't work for you.
yeah. Let me get back to you on that tomorrow. Let me check exactly my travel schedule.
Okay.
And if I'm there here in town, it's fine. Otherwise, maybe we have to move it up a week.
Okay, are we good? I just, before we make a motion to adjourn, I thought tonight would be the appropriate opportunity to close out our meeting in memory of the 1.5 million Armenians, men, women, and children who were killed by the Ottoman Turks in the Armenian genocide of 1915. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.